Welcome to an hour of Healthmade Radio. Healthmade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. A core concept belief is an innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. Healthmade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I will be your host. Today's guest is Marla Frees. Transformational psychic medium Marla Frees. She spent 25 years as a successful TV and stage actress, and since devoting herself to her current work, she has appeared as a psychic medium on A&E, Bravo, History Channel, SyFy, TV Land, and Gaia TV's Beyond Belief with George Noory. Radio audiences have heard Marla on George Noory's Coast to Coast, Lisa Garr's Aware Show, Jenniffer Weigel's Conversations with Weigel, and dozens of podcasts. Marla was a co-host and psychic medium expert for Dreamland on unknowncountry.com, and most recently appears on YouTube teleconferences with physicist, author, and consciousness expert Tom Campbell, blending physics with metaphysics to understand the science of how Marla works. She appears across the country presenting messages with Marla to small and large groups, educating people about their own intuition, connecting them with diseased loved ones, and potentially providing information about any aspects of their lives for their greatest good. And she has now coming out with an amazing book called American Psychic. Marla, it's such an honor to have you on the show today. I'm so pleased to what we're going to be talking about.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. Me too. I'm really thrilled to be on your show.
It was quite fascinating, and when I was reading your book, and I did finish it last night. It was an incredible book. It's one of those that you have a hard time to put down because you want to see what's happening next. But I noticed that thinking by the time you were 21 years old, I felt like you'd lived like 3 lifetimes already, and I wondered, but wait, there's more.
Yeah. I'm glad you felt that way. I'm glad you felt it was a page turner. It would be a real snooze if it wasn't, right? It'd be hard it would be hard for me to promote this book if it wasn't a page turner.
Well, you did a wonderful job, and I'm curious because the book is called American Psychic, and so how would you define psychic? I mean, what for the listeners? What does that mean, really?
Well, let me just give you a little background on this. First off, I was highly skeptical of anything that's in the book, except, of course, it is my memoir. So it literally is the journey from the trauma and the drama of my life, the trauma of my childhood, the drama of a former acting career into the transformation of what I do now. And believe me, I had no interest in talking to the dead. I was doing a lot of television shows. I sold beer and cheese and tampons and all sorts of things on commercials. And I was in top shows all through the 90s. So when this all happened to me, it certainly was a revelation. It was something that really smacked me. So the dynamic of psychic was I was tapping in and accessing information for my highest good because someone had stalked me. And then I ended up working for law enforcement, and then I ended up being trained by the U.S. military psychic spies, who basically, Michael, are the ones that helped me understand what psychic really is. Psychic is the ability to access information. It can be about any aspect of anyone's life, but there's a science behind it, and we're all capable of it.
It's fascinating because we are so used with our normal 5 senses, and we think that if we can't measure it with those 5 senses, it doesn't exist. So, but this the ability
that's
to be
interesting.
Psychic, yeah.
Well, that's interesting that you say that because, science is always talking about measuring something. Well, those of us who are intuitive, which is most of the people that are listening to the show, understand that they have awarenesses that they don't know where it comes from. You know, all through the book, I talk about how spirit spoke to me, how, whether you want to call this the larger consciousness system, which most people call God, the Holy Spirit, whatever the vernacular is that we've been using in order to know that we are gaining access to information for what I do now for other people is for your highest good. But this was also necessary for me because my life was shifting. My life was in danger. And as soon as I addressed that, my antennas blew out of my head. And you know what, Michael? They haven't gone down since. So that was the mid-'90s.
Yeah, and it seems to me that without this, your ability in this area, I don't know, I was counting through the book, and I think I lost count how many times you probably would have been dead.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to laugh at that, but yeah. Well, yes, there were some really, really, really dicey experiences. And, you know, I think that this book, when people read it, they go on their own journey. And I'm sure it brought up things for you because when you go on the journey with me, you're like, oh, that happened to me. Oh, I see how that was a divine intervention. Oh, I see, and this is really the whole trajectory of the book, how we have been guided, literally guided, if we're still alive, how we have been guided up until this point in our lives.
And so with that, I mean, how do you feel? How did this develop? I mean, why you? I mean, why? Because, I mean, we all, I assume, we all have these gifts, even though they're not developed. So I would assume it's kind of like playing a sport. You know, some people may have a natural talent, but you can always learn how to do it.
Well, I agree with you. So and this is also for people who know your work. You've been trying to help people heal in various modalities. And what I experienced as a child was my sensitivities were heightened because of trauma. My mother was not well. She was narcissistic. She was borderline. She had Munchausen's by proxy. There were a number of things that were actually wrong with her. But back in the 60s, we didn't have a lot of doctors identifying this. So she didn't know how to handle her emotions. And when she raged, she was physically, emotionally abusive. And there are other elements that I discuss in the book. But the point of this was I had to intuit how to survive her. So that intuition started a long, long time ago. It just didn't, blossom until the mid-'90s. So the psychic part of me was developing. And because of the trauma and the heightened sensitivities, I learned, Michael, to leave my body, which in psychology is called disassociation or splitting. My consciousness would leave when things were being done to me that shouldn't have been done. And so I was able to start doing that, which, interestingly enough, became a real tool for me when I started training as a remote viewer with the U.S. military psychic spies, and seeing how I could send my consciousness to a location to describe those things, because I ended up working for law enforcement for a while.
Yeah.
So we all have these abilities, but I could not believe that this was happening to me. This is the whole point. I was so skeptical. I had an attitude. I was snarky. I was judgmental, and I thought, this is a load of crap. And then when it happened to me, I was like, oh, my God, I have to get curious. This is literally going on. And I went to therapists and all sorts of doctors, and I went to clergy and all of it. And so that whole terminology of psychic got really dispelled quickly because I wanted to understand. Because there's a lot of weirdness around that terminology, but it literally is psychic functioning. It is what our consciousness, our brains, our souls, our hearts can do, which is outside of the normal realm.
Yeah, it's just kind of turning on an aspect of yourself that is normally not activated, and you had to do it based upon survival. And as a child, you rely on your parent for survival. So you have to continually figure out how to best survive around them. And that's from your story around your mother. I mean, you continually had to monitor to see how you were best going to make her happy.
Right. And the audiobook, I have not launched the audiobook yet. It is up on Audible right now. But during the pandemic, this is one of the things that I did. I went to a little studio, and my producer sat on one side of the wall, and I sat on the other. And I took the time to give voice to this. And reading my mother's voice was an interesting experience. I had to really look at how I wanted her to be heard. And it's a tricky thing as a former actress. I don't do that anymore. I left acting in 2002 to completely do this work. But the transformation of what happened with my mother and myself went through the death process, all the way through her being dead for a number of years before another medium. I had to bring in another medium to facilitate communicating with her. So I know how important both sides of the veil, the being able to communicate, being able to talk therapy, even with the dead, and that they can hear us, they can feel us, they can see what their lives here on earth did do to us. And in that, we are working together, co-creating in healing, Michael, to survive.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Healthmade Radio. I'm here with Marla Free. She's the author of an amazing book called American Psychic. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Marla Free. She's the author of American Psychic. I'm almost, I was going to say American Spy. But being a remote viewer, I guess it's a little bit of that. You can spy on people.
Yes, have you ever taken any classes in that, Michael? Have you ever done any training?
I haven't, but I'm very well aware of. I did interview Nancy McMoon-Eagle on my show.
Yes. Good. I love Nancy. Yeah.
Yeah. She is amazing, and also another trainer from the Monroe Institute, John Kratom.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're fascinating individuals. I would love to take the training that you took. I mean, I know that's just...
Well, actually, it is online with various people, but Nancy Scooter, we call her Scooter McMonagle, is married to Joe McMonagle, who is the top remote viewer in the entire world. So, and he was a psychic spy for a long time. But it's amazing, this stuff. And, I ended up working with Tom Campbell. And Tom Campbell, you might know, developed the HemiSync program at the Monroe Institute with Bob Monroe and Dennis Metternich, another engineer. That's the binaural beat system that has basically been the trademark. And, actually, someone else just bought it. But it still is used at the Institute. And Tom, I met 10 years ago when I was doing the radio program Dreamland for unknowncountry.com. I had him on the program, and I started working with him. Now, of course, I'm very right-brained, and he's left-brained, and it made my head hurt for a number of years. But he helped me make the science of all of this, the paranormal parts, normal. Because I was working with all these incredible scientists who tossed aside their materialism about science and started to adapt sort of a virtual reality to understand that we are part of consciousness. Like if you're doing a game of World of Warcraft on the computer's like God, and we are the players of our own avatars. So I'm a continuing student of consciousness.
It's fascinating, and it's the blessing of having Dr. Amit Goswami on the radio show talking about the non-local mind and that time doesn't exist, and kind of recognizing that we are here now all the time, which means that there's no separation whether an individual is dead or alive. I mean, we can still access that, and that was so beautiful with your mother. I mean, like we were talking before the break, that you were, even though she had left, you were able to access that and have healing with your mother, even though she had passed on.
Yes, and that's really sort of the cornerstone of the work that I do when I am helping people with their deceased loved ones. It's interesting because, it's funny. I love the work I do. The dead have taught me so much about life, and I don't have really many family members. I don't have anybody really living that I'm really in communication with. So I get to feel the love that people have for each other between the living and the dead. I get to feel that connection. It's quite a remarkable thing. And, it's funny because when this was all starting, I was having the dead push their way into my life to make me communicate with others. And I had to have boundaries with my mother, so of course I had to have boundaries with dead people too, which was very interesting. It's all kind of fun. But the dynamic is consciousness survives death. And, we have ideology and belief systems that keep us from actually doing that, when in fact we are constantly part of Source, part of the universe, part of God, part of that whole conversation. And having been raised Lutheran, and then I became a born-again Christian, John 3:16, and God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son to die for us. And who shall ever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Well, when I heard that back in the day, I kept thinking, what is that all about? And, well, I found out.
Yeah. And so I'm curious when the first time that you experienced this, when a dead person or a person on the other side, or however you want to identify that, it must have been scary. It must have been really unsettling.
Well, you have to understand, I was put into this situation based on my own sort of, I guess I have to give the details of this. I had my wisdom teeth taken out. They call them wisdom teeth for a reason. So I was sort of doped up on Percocet when I met this young man who was a barista at a local coffee shop. And I'm not going to go into too many details, but something was very unsettling about him. But I just kept pushing it off, like many of us do. And I write, there are a couple of chapters. One of my favorite chapters is The Gift of Fear, where we are warned by our own intuition and we're not listening to it. So at that time, what happened was a dear friend of mine, Jerry Rubin. Remember Jerry from the 60s? He was one of the yippies with Abby Hoffman.
Yeah.
He was killed when he crossed Wilshire Boulevard here in Los Angeles. And I just spent the last weekend with he and his girlfriend, and we were getting ready for Thanksgiving, and it was the most shocking thing. You never expect to go into an ICU and see a friend of yours split up the middle and a traction device on the head like Frankenstein. And at that time, I wasn't talking to dead people. And I walked out of that experience praying and asking, what can I do for Jerry? And I heard, I'm not coming back. And I didn't think that it was him. I just sort of passed it off. And the next day he died. So that moved into the stalking incident when a dead person started giving me information about the stalker. So it wasn't as though I was frightened. I was more curious because I was being told where to go, what to do, what to look at, pay attention to this, pay attention to that. It was not like the voice that I had learned as a young girl to listen to, what I thought was the voice of God, or giving me information that I needed to know. This was different. This had a personality behind it that I had never felt before. So Spirit led me into various positions, into putting me right at smack dab in the middle of James von Prague's house, who is one of the most well-known first psychic mediums that were out there, who basically paved the way for so many of us. But Spirit put me in his house, and James said to me, you're a medium, and I'm going to show you. So he put me in a class. And so that's really how I sort of found my way through all of this. But, the book tells it in a more colorful way, I guess.
Well, it's only so much you can do in 40 minutes.
Okay, so here I am with you on the phone, and I know that you know things. I know that you talk to your grandmother. I know that you have conversations about medicine with someone on the other side.
Which is really, and these are the kind of pieces of information that allows us then to recognize that we are not isolated. We're part of a continuum. That so we're not thinking that there's this sudden end, and you have all that healing that still exists, even though you're moving on. There's still healing taking place.
And you continue to get information. I think that some of your modalities have probably come from people who want you to know this information, who have led you. It's curious. I see you in an airport at one point in time, talking with some people and getting ready to do something regarding healing, a modality, and having your whole world turned upside down because of what you learned.
Yeah, that happens plenty of times.
There you go.
Yeah. No,
so those are the things that I'm looking at you. Sorry, yeah. I usually ask for permission, but we're in this because I know you're in this with me.
Yeah.
And your listeners know this about you.
Yeah. And that is, and what I've learned, and that I thank you so much. I feel really honored that you're kind of taking a peek, so to say. And that is what I feel in my work, and I think that this is something that each individual needs to recognize, that it's available, that there's so much information, there's so many wise people that has gone before us, and that have gone on the journeys that we've gone, and then to be able to benefit from their wisdom, and to be able to be open and recognize that there's a different sense than just working with your brain. There's parts of you, if you can connect to that, you can be part of that, receiving that information that is always there.
Yes, and you know what? You're bringing something up that you, of course, know Bruce Lipton.
Yeah.
So there's a wonderful video on YouTube with Tom Campbell and Bruce Lipton, two scientists, talking about this stuff, where Bruce really goes into, he is pulling apart the whole thing about the cells and the paramecium and the paramecium feeling stuff. And Gabor Mate, I've been a student of Gabor Mate as well, when the body says no, and there are a number of different psychologists that love to talk about how the body reacts. My body is a Geiger counter, and that's what was often happening for me before I could even articulate what was going on. And I know that our listeners feel this way too. People ask me about this pandemic and say, what month is this? This is July, right? I can't believe we're moving into August. But in October of last year, I stopped paying on a trip to Italy that was supposed to happen in September of this year. I just stopped paying on it. And I was supposed to start paying for trips to North Carolina and up the coast because I was still doing book tour stuff. And all of a sudden, I just stopped, and I didn't know why. It's not like I'm walking around like I think I know everything, because I don't. I had to look at that and go, I know that something's happening, but I just have to trust what it is. And this is another aspect that we're all sort of untethered at this time, because we can't guess what this virus is going to do, but we can certainly intuit in our own bodies how we need to take care of ourselves, not out of ego, not out of fear, but out of protecting ourselves and others by thinking of others with compassion.
love that. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Marla Fries. She's the author of American Psychic. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Marla Fries. And Marla, I really loved what you're saying about this virus thing, because that's something that's brought a lot of fear in the individuals, and the ability to disconnect, I would say disconnect from all the information that the media is just pouring over an individual, and then recognize that you have this additional sense or this additional guiding force that can put you in the right location at the right time doing the appropriate action. I mean, and that seems like what it is, like you're saying, that you have that Geiger meter, telling you, what feels right, what doesn't feel right.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's tricky. I mean, at this age, I'm pretty good at it, but there's also a desire or a willingness. We always do this. It doesn't matter how psychic we are, how gifted we are, how famous we are, any of that. There are times in our lives where we just don't know. And, I have a whole book about me making dumbass mistakes, right?
Welcome to the club. But I think you're quite up there as one of the winners.
That's great. I love that. Thank you. Well, yes, but it's kind of funny. I mean, the book opens on my marriage ending, but I don't really talk much about my marriage. There's other things that are more interesting. But I remember walking down the aisle going, I have to marry this guy. Yeah. I love him, but I know that I'm going to have a lot of heartache, and I know this is going to be problematic, but I have to marry him. Okay. So there are other things where we keep being shown, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And, people come to me all the time. They want to know things. Well, the point about coming to me is, I laugh, because if I did put this up on my website, you're going to get the information that you need, not that you want. I don't know how many people would hire me. I basically am working for your greatest good. Yeah. But so many people, are locked down about what they think they need, what they want. And, we have a pervasive disease of being disappointed in this country. And yet people call me, I don't know, 6 months, a year later, 2 years later. I'll be walking in Trader Joe's, and someone calls me and says, Marla, do you remember when you talked to me about that blonde guy with the wire-rimmed glasses that was going to come in and fix everything? Well, he did. And I'm like, hello, who is this? Who am I talking to? So, of course, she was probably mad at me 2 years before that I didn't give her the information that she wanted, but this is an ongoing process, and we're all working together.
And that is the thing. I mean, we live in this instant gratification, and we want everything better, and we want everything to be a linear approach, meaning that it should get better and better and better. And if we don't have that, then yes, there's disappointment, and we try to avoid that because we think that disappointment and learning lessons are bad. And I loved one of the components in your, it was frequently in your book, where you felt that this may not be a good outcome, but this was an important step that you needed to take. Like you're mentioning an event with a very famous actor that you didn't mention by name.
Right.
But you felt that you needed to complete this process even though you felt that it was not a good process.
Well, right. I mean, the actual audio clip on Audible is part of that experience because this was back in the 90s. This was before Harvey Weinstein. This was before the Me Too movement, all of this. And, back in those days, you meet a powerful icon, one of the most well-known actors, producers, directors in the world. And he takes an interest in you, and things go the way that he wants them to go. And I had to fulfill on, you set this up, this has been set up, you have to fulfill this, you must go, you must see this process through. And of course, it's not pleasant, and and some of it's funny. But the dynamic of what it did was, boy, it was such resolve for me, Michael. I came out of that experience going, oh my God, I will never let this happen to me again. I will never have this, and this, and this. And it made me have such resolve. And this was before I was a psychic medium. This was before any of this sort of like blew up. This was when I knew that I would have to protect women. And of course, later on as a psychic medium, I'm looking for the dead bodies of these girls who have trusted the darkest part of men's desire and paid the price.
Yeah, and you used the term, and you mentioned that finding these women in the desert where, like this gentleman said, I'm going to drain the blood out of you. And you are then looking for these women, that's been hidden out in the desert that has gone through exactly that. It's horrific. But it seems like that event was a really pivotal moment in your ability to draw a line and to say no, that you were worthy enough to say no.
Yes, and that's part of the tragedy that we in America are experiencing right now. One of the reasons I called the book American Psychic is because the background of my history is my father was a World War II veteran who was blown up in a landmine accident and came back to the States from Germany in a body cast. So he became an alcoholic, and I had to navigate that and, of course, the behavior and the illness of my mother. And I watched as our generation basically were children who became codependent, needing so much and love outside of themselves. And we're still in a situation where we need a father figure that's going to save us, or that savior figure, when we in fact are the ones that have to take care of ourselves and each other. And I think that this virus is really teaching us that. This is about others.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to take a quick break. You're listening to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Marla Free. The book is something that you need to get, American Psychic. I couldn't put it down, and it's not a 10-pager. It's more than 10 pages, but it was worth every page. I tell you that. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthmade Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Marla Free. So, Marla, one of the things we were talking about, that pivotal moment where you said no, and also how we, as an American society, we tend to be codependent, and and you're also mentioning the virus, the impact of this virus, and how we are now becoming codependent in a way for the media to tell us and for scientists to tell us what to do, and so our whole life is now becoming guided and controlled by something outside of us, and because we have that propensity of our codependency, we feel safer within that rather than feeling what's right or connecting with who we truly are and listening to that inner voice and inner ability.
Well, that's a really tricky thing because, it forces us to educate ourselves, or because it's been politicized, it's easy to fall into one camp or the other. But I think it's really smart for all of us to go, well, we've never been here before. We have never lived through a pandemic. We don't know. We can blame, another country about how it came in, et cetera. It's really up to us. Excuse me. It's up to us how we listen from that point on. And we need help. Everybody's looking for help outside of ourselves. But one of the things that you're doing is you are making sure that people improve their immune systems. You are helping people move through their own pain, which is a lot of physical pain, and it's oftentimes because of emotional pain. So taking the steps to heal ourselves in the very best way we can. And, it's tricky engaging in some of the dialogue about all of this, but I think that the leaders, whether we think that they're inept or whether we think that they are gifts from God, they are. to some degree, whether it's to see the corruption, whether it's to see the blessings, whatever it is, whatever propensity you choose. The bottom line is we have to take a look at this. And history is always here to remind us. History comes in these waves. And, I wasn't a historian in any way, shape, or form, but I have found that Heather Cox Richardson, who is a historian and a scholar, is somebody that I like to turn to because I love listening to how our forefathers did crap and survived. But we are also in that dynamic. We are very vulnerable right now. And to find ways to get curious instead of thinking that we know. It's this whole weird thing. Even though I work as a psychic, I don't know everything. I know when I'm working for someone, I see future probability factors, and I can talk to your dead relatives. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to give you the formula for, a vaccine. This is something that we have to all work together to do. And we're constantly, navigating our being fearful. And it's one of the key things that I do. I exercise. I try and eat right the best I can. I rarely, drink, and I certainly don't smoke, and I'm not an imbiber of really any drug. So I can't dumb myself down in order to medicate myself out of this pain. I have to exercise. I have to be healthy. And this is one of the things that I know that you are perpetuating within your own business and how you live your own life. And by the way, you are in Meridian, Idaho, is that correct?
I am, and it was funny when you were talking about Sun Valley, which is right, obviously right next door.
Yes. Yes. Well, I was wondering because if there wasn't a pandemic, I would come up there and I would work and do groups if you would allow me to facilitate that, where I'm working with small groups of people or larger groups, just literally standing in front of people, accessing information and working together to heal things, because that's what we do.
Yeah, that'd be a wonderful gift. That'd be absolutely a wonderful gift. Obviously being able to access people that have left us, on this earthly plane. What are some of the lessons that you've learned? I mean, what are some of the takeaways that you feel that is important that you normally would not understand about our existence and who we are and things that function?
Oh, great question. Well, one of the things that I've learned about what happens to those that are in the death process is, they're going through this. They don't care whether you're there or not, but you care whether you're there or not. They are in a process. People are always saying, oh, I'm so sorry that I wasn't there. Well, they're not thinking that way. They're literally thinking, I'm dying and I got to do something about this. So they're in their own process. If we have the blessing of being able to be there for that transition, wonderful. But a lot of people are always guilt-ridden about not being able to be there. And these loved ones don't necessarily care about that. The other one of the things that pops into my mind is that when the soul or the consciousness leaves the body, a lot of those issues that were in the tissues are left in that body. That consciousness moves on, and they have memory and retention and all of this about what they did and how they did it and how they lived. And they can make my body feel things, like if they had a heart attack, I can feel things in my body, or if they had a broken leg, they can show me that their leg hurt. Various things like that, just subtle things that they can tell me. But the bottom line is they leave those things behind. So they don't leave, and they're not, continually broken from all of the things that happened, especially the ones that are sick. When they leave the body, they're like, oh, my God, I'm so glad to be out of that body. I've heard that many, many, many times. But, we are all, this is part of my belief system from, working with Brian Weiss, many lives, many masters, the father of basically past life regressions. But I really do believe that we choose our lifetime to learn what our souls need to learn, that we come here at this time to help ourselves and others, help ourselves learn what our souls need, and to be here as we are all being here for this huge transformation that is happening all over the world.
And so what is, so we're coming here, if talking about that, we're coming then back to life, to this earthly plane many times to learn these different lessons. What is it? What are we striving towards? What are we becoming?
Well, we just have to grow up. Look at where our consciousness has been. And wars, as I said, this American part of us, we're a warring country, and the other countries are warring too. And our country is the last bastion of democracy, and we're in trouble. So we're looking at that. We have to look at that. We are vulnerable, and all the other countries have looked to us for various reasons. But how we approach war and all of that has to change. We have to change that inside of ourselves. Yes, of course we need to protect ourselves. And yes, of course we want the police and all of these things. But some of the base elements of who we are as human beings is absolutely insane that we react to people of different color in a negative way.
Yeah, and it's always that fear reaction when you are in a... when it's something that you don't recognize or that's not familiar to you or that you can't relate to, then you respond with fear rather than allowing that information to become part of you.
Right. And we have 400 years of history of this country. And, it's very interesting. I always suggest anybody that has any kind of problem with their own race, basically go get your DNA tested because you will be so surprised. I have 0.8... what's the area? It's the Iberian Peninsula, which is basically the slave trader port that's, above Africa. Well, I've got 0.8% African in me. And there's been some work done in my family to access all of my African-American heritage down south in North Carolina, South Carolina. I haven't met all of those people yet, but when you know that you are not what you think you are, that you are a mishmash of, I don't know, I'm 46% French and German, and the rest is English, Irish, but that other aspect of me, when I saw pictures of my great-great-grandmother, everybody said that she was Cherokee. It bodes to Elizabeth Warren's thing that she had to look at. We saw pictures. And we thought, wow, she's Cherokee because there were a lot of Cherokee down there. Not like a smitter of American Indian is in me. It's black. Her photograph looks Cherokee, but she was mulatto.
Yeah.
So, we have things to learn, and it's all about love. It's all about love. So we're here to grow up and find our way to loving each other the very best way we can.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Marla, it's been such a pleasure and such an honor to have you on the show, and what you're bringing such a gift to the world where people are recognizing that healing can take place even though somebody leaves us. Healing is still there. And I mean, like your journey that talking in your book with about your mother and the tremendous healing that where you've finally had another medium to help you and facilitate that healing. I mean, is really touching and heartfelt, inspirational, and giving us hope. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you, Michael, for the work that you're doing. I'm so grateful, and I'm sure that your listeners are too.
Well, thank you so much. That is it for today. You're listening to Healthmade Radio. Remember, check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it.